Thank you for joining me today, Mr. Laing. This podcast will be a way for the members of the Society to get to know you a little bit more and to learn a bit about your plans for the future of the Society. But before we get on to that, it would be nice to hear a little bit about you. You've had a remarkable career, being appointed Deputy Ambassador in Riyadh and then Ambassador in Oman and Kuwait. What led you to pursue a career in diplomacy?
Well, I did the process for joining the Foreign Office during my last year at university. I think I knew quite an early stage in my university career that I wanted to work abroad. And I'm quite a sort of patriotic kind of guy, and I thought working for, rather than working for an individual company, though I did have offers from individual companies with interests abroad, I thought working for the Foreign Office would answer the kind of work that I wanted to do.
And did you choose to be based in the Middle East specifically? Did you have any previous connections?
No, not at all. I had been a volunteer teacher in India, so that I knew that I was comfortable with living and working abroad. But the process of becoming an Arabic speaker was one of those things that goes on in the Foreign Office. Was the practice then in the Foreign Office, whereby they exercise a sort of gentle twisting of the arm to say, will you please volunteer for the Arabic programme, because they were short of volunteers that year. And in those days, you joined the language training programme before you knew what embassy you would go to, and they decided, there was a bit of consultation, but they decided which embassy you would go to somewhere midway through the Arabic training course. So I did the Arabic training course with a number of others, of course, in Shemlan, the famous Middle East Centre for Arab Studies, MICAS, known to all the Arabs as the spy school. And of course there were spies at it as well as straight Foreign Office people. And that's how it all began.
And where were you placed first? In the
Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia. I remember going along to the person who was in charge of the personnel department, as it was then called. It's now called Human Resources, of course. The personnel department with my then fiancée, now my wife, she, the personnel officer, when I said that I'd be quite interested in going to Saudi Arabia, looked at her and looked at me and said, then looked back at her again and said, Sabella, are you sure that this is what you want? Anyway, she's very loyal and actually worked out very well. Yeah.
And what were your first impressions when you got there? Was it the first time you'd visited the Middle East?
Well, Saudi Arabia in 1974, very beginning of 1974, that is to say before the oil price shock later in the year, Saudi Arabia was a fairly undeveloped country. I mean, I have to choose my words quite carefully, but oil was $1.50 a barrel, and although the Saudis were producing a lot of oil, there wasn't a lot of money going around for development, and there were also severe skill shortages, and so we had a program of we called it paid technical assistance. It was a bit like a development program in a developing country, but the Saudis did pay for it. They had enough money for that. So in Saudi, and in those days, Dubai, for example, was just a few small buildings around the creek. I mean, the development in these countries has been,
very
in the last
rapid.
50 years, has been 40, 50 years, has been absolutely astounding.
And when did you move to Oman?
Oh, that only came much later in my career. In fact, although I served in Saudi Arabia, as I say, early on, the embassies then were in Jeddah on the Red Sea, not in Riyadh. And then later on I was in Cairo. And so I didn't really get to know the Gulf until much later in my career. Oman was my penultimate post in the Foreign Office, and then after that I was in Kuwait, yes.
And what were your impressions of Oman as opposed to the other cities that you'd been based in?
Well, I suppose what struck me after these two postings in the Gulf, and also visiting other places in the Gulf, because what happens when you work as an ambassador in one of these places is that you get to visit the other ones, partly because your friends are there. We all in the Arabic speaking community and in the Foreign Office we knew each other pretty well, and so you go and see your mates from time to time, but also we had what we called heads of mission conferences, where ambassadors get together in a region. And so I saw all the GCC countries. I'm not sure if you can still refer to the GCC, but it just about exists, the Gulf Cooperation Council. 6 countries: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Emirates, and Oman. And so I visited all those and got to know them. And indeed, when I went to Kuwait, we drove from Muscat to Kuwait. And they are each different. You know, one likes to say, oh, the Gulf, and try to generalise about it, but actually you can't.
Very distinct.
And Oman is particularly distinct by being, as it were, a real country, not a city-state like Kuwait, Qatar, and the individual Emirates, but being a place with, of course, a very large capital area, where about 1/8, is it 6 or 8 of the population live. But you know, lots of people lots of Omanis live in towns and villages scattered all over the country, which is the size of England. I think it's the size of England and Wales.
And how long were you placed there?
In Oman, I did a typical Foreign Office posting, which is 3.5 years.
Okay. I understand that recently you and Robert Alston published a book on the history of Britain's relationship with
I think
Oman.
it's just behind you here, isn't it? I just saw it. Yes, it's called
Unshook Until the End of Time.
Unshook Till the End of Time. This curious word comes from a quotation from the Treaty of 1800, when the British representative and the Sultan signed an agreement which said, among other things, that the friendship between the two countries should be, quote, unshook till the end of time, or until the sun and moon have finished their revolving careers.
Lovely quotation.
Yeah, it's great. And it has another advantage, which we hadn't thought of at the time when Robert and I chose the title, which is that it's the only appearance of the word unshook in the Amazon title list.
Oh, brilliant. Easy to find.
So it's very easy to find.
And did you find anything which surprised you when you were researching for that?
Yeah. I think the sort of aspect of it which I hope we brought out in the book is India. And that is to say that the relationship between Britain and Oman, which really started in about 1646 actually, in the middle of the 17th century anyway. So that's half a century, that's about 40 or 50 years after the foundation of the East India Company, which was started in 1600. And all the way through, really, this theme recurs, which is that both sides, both the Omanis and the British, for their different reasons, wanted the relationship was very much based on a shared interest, the shared interest of peace, especially peace for commerce, in the Indian Ocean. I mean, you have to remember that Oman geographically is really an Indian Ocean state, not a Gulf state. Of course, it does have a coastline on the Gulf, naturally. But by far the largest part of the coastline is on the Indian Ocean. And their commerce, the Omanis had a very significant trading fleet, and their commerce was with India and East Africa. They built up, as we know, a series of colonial outposts, so one might talk trading outposts in East Africa. But when, for example, in the early 19th century, we did a couple of campaigns with the Omanis, with the Sultan in Muscat, to contain, or destroy really, to contain piracy. The reason was that we had a shared interest. We wanted the route to India to be safe. We used 3 routes to India, through Mesopotamia, through the down the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, round the Cape, and then after 1869, the opening of the Suez Canal, through the Suez Canal. But all of them involved going past Oman. So keeping open the route to India was absolutely crucial for us as a national interest. But the Omanis also wanted their ships to be able to trade peacefully in the Gulf and in the northern Indian Ocean.
It's very interesting with such a long relationship that we don't see very much about Oman on mainstream history programmes in the UK, and we don't learn about it very much at school. Why do you think that is? Or do you have any theories?
I'm surprised you say that, but I suppose it's true. I have the feeling that quite a number of people do know about Oman, a significant number, of course, through the armed services, because we've been engaged with the Omanis in military campaigns a lot. I'm thinking within living memory. I'm thinking of the Jebel Akhdar campaign and the Dhofar War, and also in the continuation of a very significant loan service component in the Sultan's attached to, or part of, I should say, the Sultan's armed forces, the Omani armed forces. So there are these quite significant links, and then to say nothing of the commercial and trade links, and then the cultural links through education. The Omanis have significant numbers of students studying this country. So, I suppose I understand what you mean, that it's not going to feature very much in mainstream history. But
but the links are
there
there.
Are enough links for a really healthy political state-to-state, government-to-government, but also people-to-people relationship.
I was going to ask you about that, the aspect of the people-to-people relationships. That's obviously what we try to promote here, with a lot of cultural ties and students. What is the value of those kind of ties as distinct from more formal government ties?
Well, for a start, they're fun. And people enjoy them. The activities that are organised by the society are supposed to be enjoyable and interesting, and I think they are. Then there's a kind of intellectual component. I did classics and philosophy at university, but I reinvented myself as a historian in the last 10 years. After I left, you left out the last bit of my career, of course. When I left Kuwait, after Kuwait, I went to Cambridge, where I was, in the job that I had, I was interacting a lot with, obviously with academics, with fellows of the college where I was. And I observed that, of course, they had all done, or nearly all, not the Bursa, but research degrees. So I thought, well, I'd better do a research degree myself and find out what being an academic researcher is like. So I reinvented myself as a historian, and that's really how I came to write the book. Well, actually, I focused on the abolition of slavery in the Indian Ocean in East Africa, which took me immediately, of course, to these connections with Oman through what I mentioned previously, these colonial possessions, if you like, down the coast of East Africa, because that's where the slave trade route was. So that's what happened in the sort of latter part of my career. Now I've forgotten your question.
It was asking about the value of...
that's right.
But I think this is
the intellectual component, right? So the intellectual component of the Anglo-Omani Society. I think this is important because I think I used the word interesting and entertaining. Well, and we have a lecture program where we do get a very interesting series of people in to lecture to the members, and this is popular. People come along, and they're inspired to do so because we have lecturers who are lively, but also lecturers who are contributing to the knowledge of the area that we're interested in, Oman, and to, as I say, to a significant extent, East Africa. I mention that partly because my own lecture next week is going to be about East Africa. But we mustn't forget that in about 1840, the Sultan in Muscat actually moved his court to Zanzibar and took up principal residence in Zanzibar because he was earning more from his East African possessions than he was from Oman itself.
It's very interesting. And what do you see as the future of the society? Where would you like to focus on going forward?
Well, it seems to me, I mean, maybe I'm a bit parti pris in this, but and speaking from a particular angle about our society, I mean, I think our society is different from a number of other bilateral societies, if that's the right word, operating in the UK, which is that thanks to the generosity of His Majesty the Sultan in endowing the society with this building in which we're sitting now, we have an income which we can use to spend on a very interesting programme of activities. And this enables us to do all sorts of things which a lot of other societies are not able to do. And it's expansion or continuation of those programmes that I'm greatly looking forward to encouraging as chairman. And there's another thing, which is that having this income available enables us to do much more with what we have called the new generation, the younger people, in fostering the relations and the connections between the two countries. And I think this is terribly important because, again, there's a great temptation to fall into the trap of just relying on the people like myself, actually, who are of mature age, shall we say, and have been working in Oman or country X, whatever it may be, but we're talking about Oman, and want to maintain their links. But what we want to do, and what we can do in this society, is look much more to the future.
And encourage more links to
yes,
be built.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. And my final question is, what draws you to continue to be involved in Oman? Out of all the countries that you served in, what is it about Oman that continues to interest you?
Well, I like the people. It's a beautiful place. And every time I go back there, we see the friends that we made there. Some of the friends, I can't see them all. We see some of the friends that we made there, and they're all very welcoming. You know, I got off on an aeroplane this morning, having last evening spent the evening with friends, expatriates, Omanis, and Omanis of both Indian and Arab extraction. So, you know, these are great communities that are living in Oman, and it's altogether an attractive thing. And there was a very nice touch. Why was I there? I was there for this conference on British-Omani relations in the 18th and 19th centuries, an academic conference. But the opening session was addressed by Alistair Burt, the Minister of State in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And he mentioned this series of links between the two countries, and then was kind enough to mention the personal links and said, and in the hall today we have three people who personify the closeness of the personal links between the two countries, and mentioned us three ambassadors. There were three of us there, two former members, former chairman of the society, and myself, Sir Terence Clarke, and Robert Alston and me. And he mentioned us by name as examples of people who had lived in the country some time ago, but continued their connections and their friendships.
Yes,
and these friendships are genuine.
We do hear that. A lot of the members talk about their long-lasting friendships that they made when working there.
Yes.
It's really lovely. Well, thank you for talking to us, Mr. Laing.
Okay.
And we look forward to your lecture next week.
Pleasure. Thank you.